I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, one of my favorite guests. Just very well connected. He spent years going in and out of Washington on special committees for medical stuff and healthcare issues. He is a now retired, top-notch orthopedic surgeon. He runs a radio show called Operation Freedom, a website called DaveJanda.com. There's a spoiler alert. It's Dave Janda. Dave Janda, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
It is an honor to be back here, Greg. Okay, now you don't want me to say anything like this, but listen, people need. About a week after we did our last interview, I'm at a restaurant with a couple friends, one of whom was my nurse for 22 years, who loves you, right? So she used to say to me, okay, so big deal, you co-hosted a show with Oprah, that really doesn't really matter. Well, until you get on Greg Hunter's show, USA Watchdog, you really haven't accomplished what you need to in life. So the first time I was on your show, she said, okay, I guess you finally did something. Anyway, we're all at this restaurant. This woman comes up to me. She goes, are you Dr. Dave Janda? And I go, well, yes, I am. And I'm thinking, oh, this must be a patient from long ago that I just didn't quite remember. She looks at me. She goes, I love when you are on USA Watchdog. It is my absolute favorite. And of course, my nurse for 22 years, Kathy, goes, oh, it's my favorite too. And it was, well, the other person was, oh, it's my favorite too. So I'm like, okay, well, that's good. It's my favorite too. And this woman looks at me. She goes, what's Greg Hunter really like? And here's what I said, and it's the truth. I said, he's one of the most honest people I've ever come in contact with in life. He's a friend. He's a dedicated husband to his wonderful wife, Betty. And he is an incredible son to his mom. And I can tell you, both he and his wife, Betty, they're inspirational to any of us and all of us who know what they've done to try to help his mom going through a very difficult time. And that is who Greg Hunter is. So for all of you wondering, what's Greg Hunter really like when the camera's off? He is one of the nicest, most honest, most caring people that I've ever come in contact with. And I'm not just saying that because we're here today. It's the truth.
Thank you, Dave. You're very kind.
And then she said to me, Greg, so when is Greg Hunter going to go back on CNN or ABC? And I go, I don't know. It's definitely not in the foreseeable future unless there is a huge reset and all of a sudden the powers that be are removed from the scene and honest, independent people are allowed to become journalists again. And that brings me to the point, Greg, we wanted to touch on the media thing. And after you and I spoke last night, there was an article on Zero Hedge about the New York Times. And this really says it all. This is why Greg Hunter, people like Greg Hunter, are no longer a part of the media. Because somebody who's honest and caring and truthful cannot survive in the environment and the culture like this at the New York Times. New York Times hires editor, not Greg Hunter, but this person who absolutely hates, quote, dumbass effing white people.
Oh, that's unbelievable.
The New York Times has hired a bigot whose tweets from just 48 months ago would have gotten Roseanne Barr excommunicated from the planet were the race simply changed. This week, the paper announced the addition of Sarah Jong to the editorial board as the newest in a fab group of recent additions. As the Daily Caller's Amber Athey notes, Jong previously wrote for The Verge and authored a book about online harassment and free speech titled The Internet of Garbage. One of Jong's tweets from 2016 reads, quote, dumbass effing white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants, end quote. Another reads, quote, oh man, it's kind of sick how much joy I get out of being cruel to old white men, end quote. Now you might be thinking, maybe the New York Times simply overlooked these tweets when hiring her, and she'll surely be fired like they did with Quentin Norton after his derogatory tweets about black and gay people were unearthed. Nope. In fact, the paper not only says they knew about the tweets as part of her vetting process, they said her bigoted tweets were simply imitating other races. And yet, Greg, And we've seen it this week a bunch. When Trump has called the fake media the enemy of the people, well, they're really, in my opinion, the enemy of the truth, and they're the enemy of freedom.
Very good point.
And you and I have discussed this, and I don't say this lightly. And I know a lot of globalists are going to get very upset with this, but they are truly co-conspirators in this fraud which is being perpetrated on not just the American public, but the world's population. Because they don't present the truth, they don't present the facts, and they are inherently doing everything in their power to strip freedom and liberty of every person in our country and around the world. And last night, Greg, I made a little list, and I know you like lists. I made a little list of examples of how the media are co-conspirators and in covering up issues which adversely affect the truth and freedom. Let me just hit you with a couple of these. The IRS scandal, Benghazi, Fast and Furious, the murder of SEAL Team 6. While we're on the issue of murder, the murder of Seth Rich, completely tried to deep six that. The criminal manipulation of government data that they've tried to cover up. Just look at this week. They released the employment data. Oh, it was projected 190,000 jobs were going to be created in the month of July. Came in light at 157,000 jobs. Well, when you dig through the information, Greg, of the 157,000 jobs that were created, 146,000 were created out of fiction called the birth-death model. Did the media talk about it? Did you see Maria Bartiromo or Stuart Varney or any of the dweebs on CNBS talk about that? They didn't even touch it. The media has also been involved in the criminal manipulation of financial markets. You've been the biggest spokesman about the fraud of the Iran deal and the fact that the media hasn't reported on the Iran deal, that it wasn't signed, as you have dug through and outlined.
Nobody signed it.
Or the fact that it was really a drug deal as opposed to a nuclear arms deal. What else is on this list? Them covering up the Lynch-Clinton Tarmac meeting, the Uranium One deal, the political weaponization of the FBI, CIA, and NSA. If you talk to somebody who watches CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, NBC, ABC, they have no clue about the weaponization of the FBI, CIA, or NSA because the media has misinformed, disinformed, and uninformed people about it. The bankster rape and pillage of 2007, 2008, they're still covering that up. The election fraud perpetrated by the Clintons, I'll just ask Bernie Sanders on that one. The money laundering of the Clinton Foundation, the cover-up and the disinformation on the pedophile networks, the protection of, they are always trying to protect their fellow media scum and Hollywood elites about the abuse of women. Let me give you some names. Moonves from CBS, Brokaw, NBC, Lauer, NBC, or the Hollywood elites, good old Harvey Weinstein or Spacey. Another one, Hillary Clinton's illegal email server that they've covered up. And the fact that tens of thousands of her emails were taken by China, as came out in that Strzok Goat Rodeo testimony. And they completely ignored the fact that after these tens of thousands of emails were taken off of Hillary's server and dumped into China, 18 CIA operatives were killed. How about this one? They've also, the illegal surveillance by Obama, Brennan Clapper through the platform, the Hammer, they've completely deep sixed that. The abuse of the FISA court by the CIA, the FBI, and the Obama administration, the funding and the weaponization by the United States and our allies of ISIS, and as Keith Jackson, the former sportscaster, used to talk about the Rose Bowl being the granddaddy of them all. Well, the granddaddy of them all that the media's been involved with has been the fake Russian dossier covering that up and the fake Russian hack narrative that they've pushed, which really borders on sedition. And that's just a brief list of what these folks have done.
And people are going to be stunned when these indictments start rolling. I mean, people think, oh yeah, they've heard about the indictments. Don't your sources say? And I think the same thing. I actually think this will be after the primaries, which is August 7th. I mean, after August 7th, isn't all hell going to break loose? Wasn't Trump talking about that in the rally this week? That they want me to do this before the midterms, and people are telling me, Mr. President, we should do it after, and other people are telling me before. Well, what's he talking about?
So the word I hear is that, yes, the indictments are some of them, not all of them.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Some of them are going to be used as leverage to get these people to leave. I think the ones that probably were involved in less onerous activities. I think that's one of the reasons why you see so many people leaving Congress, why you see so many people resigning from the FBI and some of the intelligence agencies, why you see so many CEOs leaving big business, why you see you're seeing a mass exodus of people. And I think that those are some people that have already been clued in. Listen, this is what we got. And if you don't move off a dead center and just get out of the limelight and just go away, that other things are going to happen, and those indictments will be open. I believe a number of indictments will be open, and the word I hear is it's going to happen after the primaries. And I think there's going to be
let me just say something. Let me just say one thing, too. Even if they don't successfully prosecute you, if they charge you with some crime or pedophilia or embezzlement or fraud or treason, I mean, those are onerous charges that even if you have to spend months, a year fighting them, your reputation is going to take a beating, especially if it's pedophilia.
Well, and you're also right, and you're starting to see some movement on that. Look, at this week, Tony Podesta, his case was moved to the Southern District of New York from Mueller.
Oh boy!
Right now, that's a bad omen for Tony Podesta and I believe John Podesta. Okay. And you also see some movement on this election front. Look, yesterday. Trump came out and said, you know what, we need to institute some voter ID laws. And this presidential commission that he set up, I believe he had Pence helping run it, looking at the voter fraud that occurred in 2016. Well, it's my understanding there were 12 states that never provided any data, such as California, Virginia, to this commission. And Trump called him on it and said, you know, how can we make any meaningful recommendations if you're not going to provide the data? And threw the penalty flag and said, you know what, if you're not going to provide the data, then we're going to go another route. And this is what the can of worms he opened up yesterday, which I believe will have a meaningful effect on the November elections of 2018.
Well, now he didn't just throw the penalty flag; he turned it into a national security issue.
Yes.
Right? I mean, now it's a national security. I mean, Russia. Okay, I'm going to do something about it. And anybody else.
Yes.
Let's talk about Clapper. Another story that you didn't name in your list. But I as a reporter, you know, I saw that story, and I saw the text of it first, and I read it, and I thought, I gotta hear this. I wonder if there's a tape for it. Well, there is. He's calling on the phone to what's his name? Anderson Cooper. Yeah. And he's calling on the phone. And, you know, if you listen to the recording, and I listened to it a couple times, they're talking about Trump. He's asking about, well, Donald Trump, and he answers, well, I don't know too much about, you know, who knows what Donald Trump would do. But let me say this. And Anderson's sitting there on, he's the only one on camera. They got a picture of Clapper. But let me say this about President Obama. And he goes into that this is all his fault. I'm paraphrasing here. This is all his fault. The Mueller investigation would have never happened without Obama. It's Obama. Obama had tasked us to do this. So it was Obama. That's not a story? Can you talk about that?
Story. And the bought-off lamestream fake media, no one talked about it. In fact, CNN, I believe, tried to scrub it off their site. But here's what he said, quote, if it weren't for, and remember, this is Obama's director of national intelligence.
And I heard him say this. This is actually on tape. This is actually in a video you can listen to.
It is. Quote, if it weren't for President Obama, we might not have done the intelligence community assessment that we did that set up a whole sequence of events which are still unfolding today, notably Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. President Obama is responsible for that. It was he who tasked us to do that intelligence community assessment in the first place, end quote. Now, Greg.
Well, Dave, that is as a reporter, that's a stunning, show-stopping, lead all the newscast, man, have a whole half hour on that one. Revelation.
Right.
But
so there are trolls out there that say, well, he was just trying to be complimentary to Obama. What?
He threw him under the bus.
He threw him under the bus. And here's the thing. Greg, I believe if something's on CNN or the mainstream fake media at this point, it's choreographed, it's already determined what's going to be said. And I know Anderson Cooper, being a part of the Project Mockingbird, appeared to be surprised over Clapper's statement. He never cut him off. He had ample opportunity to cut Clapper off in 3 or 4 parts of what Clapper was saying, yet he let him continue. In fact, when you listen to the clip, Clapper had some long pauses where Anderson Cooper easily could have stepped in and said, you know what, let's go to a commercial break, right? Or let's move on to something else. But he didn't. He let him go. And I truly believe that Clapper was delivering a message from the deep state to Obama saying, you're cut off. You're cut off.
You think that that Anderson Cooper is a asset of the intelligence services? That's Project Mockingbird, CIA?
Well, a lot of people that have said that, and there's nothing in his past that tells me that assessment is wrong.
But you think, even if he's not an asset of the CIA, he was in on the deal that Clapper called him likely ahead of time and said, hey, listen, Anderson, I've got to say this on the air. When we talk, I'm going to work my way into saying this about Obama, and don't cut me off. I mean, you think they had some kind of a thing ahead of time. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll give you a good example of you've done a tremendous amount of network media when it was legit. I did a fair amount of network media when it was still legit. But even when it was still legit, I can tell you things when I did Dan Rather's CBS News report. They'd kind of go through it and they go, well, we don't really want you to go there. We'd rather have you go here. I said, well, I'm going to go where I want to go because that's what people need to know. And sure as shooting, a number of times that part would be edited. Okay, but at least they'd let you say it. But let me get a recent example. A guest you've had on, I've had on, Helen Chapman, a phenomenal, one of the best trial lawyers in our country. She's the one who helped bring down Bernie Madoff. She went after Jamie Dimon because she had proven that there was collusion between J.P. Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon, along with Bernie Madoff. She's on Maria Bartiromo's show on Fox.
Yeah,
and they obviously didn't do their research because Maria looks at her and goes, and Helen loves to tell the story, and it's really interesting and proves what we're about to speak about. Maria goes, oh, well, Helen, what are you working on now that you've taken down Bernie Madoff? Well, Maria, I'm working on the collusion between J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, along with Bernie Madoff. And all of a sudden, Helen starts hearing this kind of screaming in Maria's earpiece. She could hear it across the table. And Maria says, excuse me, we need to go to an emergency break. Now, Greg, in all your days in the in the big media, have you ever heard of an emergency break?
No.
So they went to a commercial. And as they go to a commercial, these 2 guys in black suits come up on each side of Helen, pick her up out of her chair by her elbow, and take her out of the studio. And the next week, so she never hears anything from Maria. And the next week, Maria's interviewing Jamie Dimon about what a benevolent and wonderful person he is.
Just so you know, to back you up, I believe the fine was $2.6 billion in restitution and fines to avoid criminal penalties.
Right.
That's an actual fine they actually got. I want to say it's $2.6 billion.
So none of these things happen in a vacuum, Greg. I believe Clapper just didn't shoot his mouth off. Okay, and it wasn't an accident. Look, Clapper is not a dumb man. He's a very smart man. Now, I might think he has some evil tendencies based on who he hangs with, but he's not a dumb guy. And he's been around the rodeo before. And and he's the former director of national intelligence.
Yeah.
This is a high-level position.
The highest.
Right. So he just didn't drop that little nugget out of, well, hey, you know what? Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say something here about Obama. I'm just going to. No, this was pre-planned, and I believe that it was a message being sent from the deep state to one of their middle-level puppets. Middle level being Obama's, Clinton's, Bush's, Soros. I believe this is a message to one of their middle-level puppets, Obama, saying, you know what? We're cutting you off. And frankly, within about 48 hours of Clapper making that statement, George Soros came out with a statement about how disappointed he was with Barack Obama.
And then Obama heads off to Africa.
Yeah, now isn't that interesting, right? So he goes to South Africa, he goes to Kenya, then he goes to, or South Africa, then he goes to Kenya. I'm not sure what the order was. But when he's in South Africa, now this is supposedly he's the Nobel Prize laureate, or a Peace Prize laureate, right? What's going on in South Africa?
White genocide.
Going on? What?
White genocide.
White genocide. And in fact, I believe the African National Congress the other day and the president just within the past day or two said that, yeah, we are going to implement rules and laws to confiscate property of white farmers, and they will not be reimbursed.
Obama called that, quote, inspiring, end quote.
Yeah.
What they were doing was inspiring.
I know. But here's the other thing, and I didn't have this on my list. Has the bought-off lamestream media spoken about the white genocide, the torture, the rape, the pillage of white farmers
there's
in South Africa?
1,500 or so, or thousands want to migrate to Russia. They want to go to Russia.
Well, they want to go. Well, yeah. Here. So let's go to the summit now, right? So even before the summit happened, it was going to be a failure. Between Trump and Putin in Helsinki, it was going to be a failure. According to the bought-off lamestream fake media, it was going to be, and in fact, they shouldn't meet. Now, one would think, if you're a humanitarian, having the two leaders of the two biggest nuclear powers with the most number of nuclear weapons, 90+% of nuclear weapons are either owned by the United States or Russia. Having two leaders sit down and discuss issues, one would think, if you're a humanitarian, you would think that that's a good thing. But if you listen to the lamestream fake media and their puppets, well, it was treasonous. It's treason. I mean, John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, it's treasonous that they met. It's treasonous what they talked about. Well, wait a minute. Maybe it's treasonous to the deep state, right? The deep state is all about chaos and war and killing and death and control and power and manipulation. And the fact that these two leaders would meet and discuss a foundation that could potentially lead to peace in Syria, in the Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, in wherever it is around the world, that's treasonous to the deep state. And I went back in the records, Greg. It was to me, it took on the air of when Reagan met with Gorbachev in 1986, in October 1986. And what I did is I pulled a headline from Time magazine at the time, and this is in October 1986. And here's what they said. This is the big headline, blazoned across the front cover. Reagan flubs Reykjavik summit. This is in October 1986. At his big meeting, the president, Reagan's obsession with Star Wars, allowed Gorbachev to outmaneuver him on arms control. Now, Greg, 3 years later, the Berlin Wall fell on November 9th, 1989.
Yep.
And 5 years later, the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time, interesting, on December 25th, 1991.
Stunning victory.
Right, a stunning victory. Yet, it was immediately and for months pushed as a complete failure. So what were the horrible words that Donald Trump said? His opening statement at the summit was this, quote, "I would rather take a political risk in pursuit of peace than to risk peace in pursuit of politics," end quote.
Where are all the peaceniks of the Democrat Party? Where are all the anti-war people of the Democrat Party? Supposedly that the Republicans are the ones that want war. Where are they? They're the crickets.
They're mute. And they're mute because all of those people that you mentioned are owned and operated by the globalist syndicate that is intent about creating war.
Well, Julian Assange outed all these. There's a list of people. I mean, there's all kinds of people at New York Times. Glenn Thrush, they hired him at the New York Times. He was at, I think, Politico. They had all kinds of people that were that they got emails where they were proving they were working. The mainstream press and the mainstream media, in terms of television media, were working with the Obama administration in a DNC and trying to give Hillary Clinton good coverage.
Closely. They were working closely.
I mean, they had emails from them.
Yes.
Here's a guy at NBC, John, what's his name, Harbaugh, or John, what's his name, giving advice.
Yeah, that guy.
Anyway, one of the guys over at NBC.
Yeah.
Harwood, is that his name?
Harwood, that's it. John Harwood, that's it.
Who was giving advice and telling what they should be doing, so
right.
they could amplify their
And he was handing that over to Podesta, Hillary's campaign manager.
I mean, he should have been fired right there, but nope, not NBC. Nope, nothing but crap.
Well, so here we are at the summit, and a couple things. Number one, reportedly, Trump and Putin met one-on-one with some translators present. And remember, once the summit ended, what were globalists, both Republicans and Democrats, by the way, in Congress screaming for? We want the translators to come forward and talk about what was discussed in these meetings. Oh, give me a break. Because they were petrified of what was discussed, right?
And I just want to add one thing.
The deep state was petrified of what these two spoke about in private.
And Russia, Putin, kicked out the Rothschild bankers out of Russia not long ago, a year or two, a few years ago. He kicked them out of Russia.
Well, and he's also no fan of Soros, right?
Yeah, no.
Right. So they have these one-on-one meetings, Putin and Trump, and then they went to a luncheon, and they had a photo op where they took their pictures at this, no food on the table, but the empty plates and them sitting there, and then photographers and reporters were asked to leave, and then Putin and his staff and Trump and his staff, the people that were with them, had another meeting. Okay. Now, this is a piece of information I got from an individual who has given me information over the years that when they tell me information, I have a hard time believing some of the things.
You brought this up in the past,
right? And I really, and I'm like, okay, well, let's see what happens. Well, I'll tell you, Greg, this person is uncanny because it usually takes longer than several weeks. It usually takes at least several months and sometimes up to a year or so for this information actually to come out. But this individual told me, yeah, well, actually, Dave, there were 3 meetings in Helsinki with Putin and Trump. Oh, 3? I go, well, there was the private one of the 2 of them, and then there was with their staffs. He goes, well, there was one in the middle. Oh, I go, you mean like over lunch? He goes, well, yeah, yes, but no. I go, what does that mean? He goes, so they did the photo op, everybody leaves the room, and he goes, Putin and his team and Trump and his team were concerned that the deep state would be listening into what was going on. And this is why there was such a hysterical reaction after the summit. Okay. The 2 of them and 2 of their advisors, this person told me, were whisked off and actually went to Air Force One, which they felt was the most secure environment that no surveillance could be implemented. And they had while this luncheon thing that was supposedly going on for an hour and a half or 2 hours, what happened is they were having this third meeting, really the second meeting, but the meeting that nobody speaks about, in Air Force One. And this is where a significant amount of information was handed over from Putin to Trump and Trump to Putin about deep state players and activities that were occurring in their respective countries and around the world.
And they knew about this meeting, even though the press didn't know about the meeting. Even though the press didn't talk about it, the deep state people know about the meeting.
Well, and I think, and the reason why we know that is because of their reaction right after the summit meeting, the press conference. I mean, it didn't take them long. It didn't take them long at all, Greg, to be shooting their mouths off about how terrible this was for Trump, how terrible this was for the United States, what an awful situation this was, right? Well, let me tell you what spurred it. One of the concerns is that Putin was going to hand over information on people in the United States that were disloyal to the Constitution and completely playing out of the deep state's playbook, and vice versa with Trump and Putin in Russia and Ukraine and the like. The name that came up at the press conference,
Bill Browder.
Bill Browder. That was Putin delivering and Trump, when Putin brought up Browder,
yep.
What did Putin do? I mean, what did Trump do? He's like, yeah. So obviously they had discussed Bill Browder, and here's why. So Putin was sending a message to the deep state, and he was also trolling all the dweebs in the deep state. We know what you're doing. We know what you're about. And what Putin dumped on the crowd, and by the way, as you've said before, Greg, you would think that if Putin says something like this, the media would have been all over it, right? They would have, because I'll read to you what he said, but you'd think the media would have been all over this, either trying to disprove him wrong, or talking about the revelations that he just presented about this Bill Browder and what he did. Instead, Greg, as you've mentioned, it was crickets.
When they did have Browder on, they painted him a hero.
And then, as the week went on, they had him on these short little clips, mainly on Fox.
Yep.
With Martha McCallan, Shannon Bream, Maria Bartiromo, short clips. They never got into depth on the issues with Browder, but that was about the extent of it.
Never talked about the CIA officers
Right.
guiding the money out of the country.
So here's this is from Zero Hedge. Putin claims U.S. intelligence agents funneled $400 million to the Clinton campaign. Vladimir Putin made a bombshell claim during the summit's joint press conference with President Trump in Helsinki, Finland, when the Russian president said some $400 million in illegally earned profits was funneled to the Clinton campaign by associates of the American-born British financier Bill Browder, at one time the largest foreign portfolio investor in Russia. The scheme involved members of the U.S. intelligence community, said Putin, who he said, quote, accompanied and guided these transactions, end quote. In December, a Moscow court sentenced Browder in absentia to 9 years in prison for tax fraud, while he also found guilty of tax evasion in a separate 2013 case. Putin accused Browder's associates of illegal earning over $1.5 billion without paying Russian taxes before sending $400 million to Clinton. Now, Greg, you being the great investigative reporter, you did some research on this, and I give you a lot of credit for it, because you actually went and found a reference from TASS about 5 or 6 days later, when the bought-off lamestream fake media in the West hadn't even discussed this. The TASS saying, well, it really wasn't $400 million that in that payment from Browder went to Clinton campaign. It was $400,000. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, a couple things.
Yeah, he never backed off that claim. He never backed off the intelligence services. The intelligence officers, those are employees, intelligence officers guided the money.
Right. So here's the thing about Bill Browder. Who is he? Well, he's a guy who was born in the United States, but he renounced his United States citizenship in 1998. It's been stated that he's an asset of our intelligence agencies. And in fact, he was sent over by our intelligence agencies. And there's one source I have that tells me that Browder's actually person who was handling him and his activities in Russia was no less than John Brennan. Which is why when Putin mentioned Browder, why Brennan went off the deep end and acted like a banshee and went screaming and yelling about this being treason that Trump would meet with Putin. Browder was sent over to Russia in the 90s to financially disassemble Russia, to strip it of its assets. And it was an intelligence agency operation. So Browder renounced his U.S. citizenship in 1998. Okay, so now he's a British citizen at this point, as of 1998. And he admits to that. Greg, here's the problem. If you're a foreign national and you donate or give money to a federal, state, or local campaign, that is illegal for the campaign to accept it, and it's illegal for the individual to do it. So I went to the FEC rules, Federal Election Commission. This is what it says, quote, about foreign nationals. Campaigns may not solicit or accept contributions from foreign nationals. Federal law prohibits contributions, donations, expenditures, and disbursements solicited, directed, received, or made directly to or indirectly by or from foreign nationals in connection with any election, be it federal, state, or local, end quote. So even if he gave $4, let alone 400,000, or it could be that Putin was also dropping a bomb when he said 400 million, that maybe if you add up all the stuff Browder did and all the and his shell companies did, that they ended up shuffling, including Uranium One, 400 million into the Clinton Foundation or the Clinton campaign or whatever it might be. Because here's the thing.
And hold on, I want to add one thing. I just want to add one thing before you get too far down the road. Browder on Maria Bartiromo said he didn't give a dime. He didn't give a dime to Hillary Clinton or the DNC. That's what Browder says. Just to put that in there. But earlier in the week, he said to Shannon Bream, 400,000. It wasn't 400 million. It was 400,000. He said that.
Yeah,
you heard him say it.
I heard him say it.
Yeah, I heard him say that. Then he recanted all that and said he
didn't
give a dime.
The story kept changing, which is really par for the course with this guy. So this is from Robert Perry, who's a really well-known American journalist. Here's what Robert Perry said. The one man that there's much of the credit for the new Cold War, that man is William Browder, a hedge fund operator who made his fortune in the corrupt 1990s world of Russian commodities trading. Browder is also symptomatic of why the United States government is so poorly informed about international developments, as he is the source of much of the congressional, quote, expert testimony, end quote, contributing to the current impasse. He has somehow emerged as a trusted source in spite of the fact that he has self-interest in cultivating a certain outcome. Also ignored is his renunciation of American citizenship in 1998, reportedly to avoid taxes. He is now a British citizen. This from the Millennium Report. Bill Browder, the CIA asset and neocon who was used to restart the Cold War with Russia. Quote, deep state agent Bill Browder operated at the very nexus of the U.S. and U.K. intelligence communities that conspired to produce both the fake Russiagate and very real Spygate. This from an intelligence analyst and former military officer. In a phrase, Bill Browder was one whose furtive American oligarchs whose mission was to steal everything in sight from Russia after the Soviet Union was dissolved. He was a CIA operative whose shell companies were set up as a platform from which to misappropriate Russian wealth however he could. Bill Browder, a uniquely American oligarch sent to Russia by his deep state handlers to fleece that country of all the wealth he could get his hands on. Educated and trained as an attorney and investment banker, he possessed the right skills to fraudulently acquire Russian assets during a period of great economic upheaval and financial hardship. You know,
and now you know why Putin brought him up in their first meeting, that he basically raped Russia financially. And Putin's letting the deep state know, we know what you did. Did he have a connection? I think you were telling me in the pre-interview that he had a connection to even back to 9/11. That there's a connection to 9/11.
So the connection with 9/11 is that they needed seed money in the 90s to support these operatives that were going in to try to take down the Russian economy. And it's my understanding that the seed money came from $240 billion worth of bonds that were created in September of 1991. This is under the Bush administration, the Bush 1 administration. And these bonds were coming due September 12th, 2001.
10-year Treasury bonds, evidently.
They were 10-year bonds. Okay. And they took the proceeds of these bonds and they funneled that money into people like Browder to set up their operations.
So they crashed the towers the day before they were due?
Well, you know what, Greg, that is a very, I think there's so many different components to it, but I believe if you look at the financial side, 2 of the 3 biggest companies that were involved in bond trading for the United States government, and the largest one being Cantor Fitzgerald, were located in the World Trade Center. And when September 11, 2001 happened, both the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Reserve set up emergency operations. And there is a very, very detailed 59-page white paper report that it's my understanding was delivered to Trump last week, that's been authored by a person by the name of E.P. Heidner, Heidner. And this is actually written, a memorandum written by Fred Burks, who's a former employee of the State Department. Here's what he says. The verifiable evidence in this document that Heidner presented, this 59 pages, strongly suggests that 9/11 was used as a cover-up for financial crimes being investigated by the Office of Naval Intelligence, whose offices in the Pentagon just happened to be destroyed on September 11, 2001. I believe 29 of the 30 people in the Office of Naval Intelligence that were involved in looking at this issue died on that day. The attacks were intended, at least in part, to cover up the clearing of $240 billion in securities covertly created in September 1991 to fund a covert economic war against Russia and the Soviet Union, during which, quote, unknown, end quote, Western investors bought up much of the Soviet industry with a focus on oil and gas. Well, who did I mention? Who was identified as one of the largest buyer of Russian commodity assets?
Say it.
And that was Bill Browder. And that's the link. You know, Philip Giraldi, and here's a very excellent journalist, and here's what he says. Now remember, Bill Browder is the guy behind this Magnitsky Act. Now, Magnitsky, according to Browder, was his attorney who uncovered some fraud within the Putin government. And because Browder and Magnitsky identified this fraud, Browder was able to get out of the country. He blew out of Dodge. Magnitsky got caught. He was put in prison and they killed him. But I refer our listeners to a movie, and I hope you'll put the link, Greg, because it's hard to get the link because the deep state has suppressed the links. Every time there's a link, it tends to get cut down. But it was a movie made called The Magnitsky Act, Behind the Scenes. And the producer is a fellow by the name of Andrei Nekrasov. Now, the reason why this is important is Nekrasov despises Putin. And he was going to do a piece about how great Bill Browder was, what a hero this Magnitsky guy was, and how important it was that this be exposed, that Magnitsky was beat to death in his prison cell. This was Putin's guys doing it. They were trying to cover up this thing. Well, this movie is incredible. And Bill Browder and the deep state have tried to prevent every screening from occurring in the country and around the world. And the reason is because when you watch this movie, and this Nekrasov, this producer, says he shows the movie that he made, adulations about Browder and Magnitsky, and then his assistant says, "Well, I think we better look into some of these documents. That's the basis of all this." And they start looking at the documents, and this entire narrative, this story that Browder has come up with is false. It's fake.
Lie.
It's a lie. It's the exact opposite. That Browder and Meninsky were working for entities that were shoveling money out of the country, just as Putin had identified. And what happened is that Meninsky was arrested for tax evasion. And it turns out when you look at the medical reports and the autopsy reports, and you look at the physical findings of his autopsies, the pictures and like, he wasn't beat to death. He died of a cardiac condition, of which his family said he had an underlying cardiac condition. Now, that doesn't mean he didn't have, he probably didn't have great medical treatment at all in the Russian prison system. I get it. But he wasn't assassinated. And one of the theories is that Meninsky was actually killed by an intelligence service because they didn't want him to testify in court about the facts of Browder and what was really going on with shoveling all these assets, these resources, and this money out of the country.
Let's fast forward to the indictments. People are wanting to know about the indictments. Let's just fast forward. The media hasn't told anybody about. The only thing you could find out is QAnon. Listen, I like QAnon, but they're anonymous sourcing. Now QAnon people say that they're going to be infiltrated, that it's reached critical mass, and so you're not. I can't tell what's real and what's not. Although I think it's real, and I hope it's good. I don't want to dog out. I think it's a big intelligence operation to awaken people. The awakening, the Great Awakening. I think that's what they call it. But you are an actual guy with sources, and you know something about it. Are we going to get these indictments dropping soon? After your last primary in your state, what is it, Michigan?
The time frame that I was given,
okay.
Because I said, everybody who's a freedom fighter is tired of hearing this. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, and nothing's happening. And so what I'm told and have been told, and it's been consistently told to me, you're going to start to see movements on the indictments after the primaries are over. Now, the primaries are over on August 7th. I believe the last primaries here in Michigan. So one of the last primaries on Tuesday, August 7th. But I have been told that look for movement on these indictments after August 7th. Look for movement on the election issues after the primaries.
They're not going to let these guys cheat.
That's
all they got.
Right. I believe they're not going to allow it. I think they're going to do everything in their power. That doesn't mean there isn't going to be some voter registration issues, that there isn't going to be some voter fraud issues, but I believe they're going to try to minimize it. And I think Trump put that card on the table just the other day when he said, you know what, we're going to go with voter ID laws and we're going to get them through quick. And because there are 12 states that won't turn over their information or data to us, as we mentioned earlier. So I believe there's going to, and I think we've gotten a little bit of a hint of that with the fact that Tony Podesta, remember now, the fake media was reporting just a week ago that Tony Podesta was going to be pleaded out, not even pled out, that he was going to be given protection in the court system, right? I mean, that's what folks in the fake media were saying. Well, it turns out that Mueller has now sent Tony Podesta's case to the Southern District of New York. Now, lest anyone thinks that that's going to be a slam dunk positive for Tony Podesta, who appointed the head prosecutor of the Southern District of New York? One of the first people Trump got rid of was Pete Bahara, and put his own person in there.
So they're going to go after voter fraud, and is this what recently in his most recent stumps or a campaign for people in the midterm elections, he said that people want him to do it before the midterms. Some people say, Mr. President, do it after the midterms. He said this. What is it? What is he talking? What is he referring to? What big thing? Do you know what it is? What to do before or after the midterm election? Is it these indictments?
I think the it is the restoration of the rule of law.
But what does that mean? What does that mean? Indictments?
Yeah, I think it means serving of indictments to not 40,000. As I said, I think a fraction of the indictments that are sealed will be unsealed and implemented. But
I believe waves of these things?
They'll be at prime players.
Are the indictments going to come out in waves?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to dump, for example, it's my understanding they're not going to dump 1,000 at a shot. That it is going to come in sections and in waves.
And are there going to be big players? You think? And I don't know I have no idea what you know. But have you been told there are going to be some big players in the first salvo? There's got to be some big people, I would think. But who is going to be? What kind of people are going to be dropped in terms of unsealed in the first round of the indictments?
I think a primetime player that you're going to see get dropped very quickly in the process is John Brennan, former director of the CIA.
Oh wow! You've been told they're going to open an indictment on John Brennan.
I have been told that John Brennan is going to be held accountable for his past actions.
And this is going to be one of the indictments dropped right after the primary season is over.
Reportedly very, very early in the process.
Anybody else that you would know? Is Clapper made a deal? How did they get Clapper to go on CNN and say Obama, it's his fault, the Mueller investigation is Obama's fault? How did they get Clapper to do that?
Well, I think Clapper, Clapper was up to his eyeballs in grief. As we have discussed before, as we presented on my show Operation Freedom before, we had General Tom McInerney on the show. He was provided information from Admiral Ace Lyons, who's another regular guest in our show. This is as far back as March of 2017 that Obama had, along with Brennan, his director of CIA, Clapper, his director of national intelligence, had hired a guy by the name of Dennis Montgomery to create a platform called the Hammer to surreptitiously monitor emails, phone calls, internet activities, financial transactions for Trump, Flynn, his team, and millions of other Americans, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And I believe that I believe those to be criminal acts of every one of those individuals: Obama, Brennan, and Clapper. Dennis Montgomery went to the FBI. His attorney was Larry Klayman, who's been on my show. I believe he's been on yours. Larry had Montgomery do a video dep under oath, brought hundreds of thousands of documents to the FBI. Comey was aware of this testimony about the illegal surveillance of millions of Americans. He then, after he was aware of it, testified in front of Congress when he was asked if he was aware of any illegal surveillance of American citizens. He said no. Right then and there, James Comey bought himself a ticket to prison. And I believe that the Hammer platform, was used on Clapper. I believe that this interview we spoke of earlier, I believe, could well have been part of his plea agreement with the powers that be.
You think that he wasn't? I mean, I thought he was basically setting up his defense, which was Obama made me do it. But you're saying that they came to him and said something like, "We want you to go on and release this information, and you're going to do it, or we're going to unseal an indictment on you."
I think he was getting it from both ends. I think he was getting it from the white hat side, and I think he was also getting it from the deep state. We want you to send a message to Obama that he's cut off.
Oh, boy. And do you think Clapper's going to be charged? He should be.
I think Clapper should be charged, in my opinion. I don't know if he is. I don't know of what type of plea agreement he could well have cut already.
But then he'd have to testify, would he not? Wouldn't he have to come out? Would that be an awful powerful testimony?
Yes, he's just not going to be able to sit in an ivory tower and watch TV.
Ooh, this is going to get messy.
Wait a minute, stop. It is going to get messy. I believe it is going to get messy.
You're going to have James Clapper. Let me just get this straight now. You're going to have James Clapper walk into a courtroom and testify against not only John Brennan, the former head of the CIA. You're going to have James Clapper likely testify against Barack Hussein Obama. Is that what you're telling me? That this is a likely scenario?
Amongst others, including, I believe, James Comey and a number of other people, yes.
People's heads are going to explode when they hear this. This is why the mainstream media is such a lie.
The only reason why their heads will explode is because they've been watching this fake media that you and I have been speaking about, because they've been kept in the dark and misinformed, disinformed, and kept completely uninformed. If folks have been watching you all along, Greg, or occasionally tuned into my show and the people that we bring forward and interview, people's heads won't explode.
They know what's coming.
Right. The only way their heads explode, the people that watch your platform and what I do and read independent information, the only way their heads explode is that this hasn't happened fast enough. And I don't blame them. It's not happened fast enough.
It's a failed coup.
It is a failed coup.
And it's the biggest domestic espionage case in the history of the world.
And it involves coordination with other intelligence agencies around the world, in particular the British GCHQ that was also involved. That Stephen Halper character and throw stealing. I mean, this was a multi-pronged attack, both domestically and internationally, against the duly elected president of the United States, Donald Trump.
And it failed.
And it's failed, yes.
I'm sorry. I usually have something clever to say, but I'm speechless. I mean, a multi-pronged attack, a globally orchestrated multi-pronged attack against a duly elected president, and it failed.
Yes, and I think the evidence is all there.
Yeah,
that's not just conspiracy theory.
No.
It's based on documentation.
There's documentation at the Department of Justice. The Inspector General report by Horowitz, the phony FISA applications, the using fake material paid for by Hillary Clinton to fraudulently apply for spying on Donald Trump, his campaign, and his administration.
Just look at the grief Devin Nunes took when he came out with the position several months ago that he had believed, based on the information he had at hand, that the FISA warrant, which was used to eventually entrap Flynn and to entrap the Trump campaign, which is yet to be shown, that was completely based on this fraudulent dossier that was created by this Steele character who had ties back to Russia, who was paid for by the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign, paid through their attorneys. Now, Devin Nunes was pounded by the fake media. He was pounded by those in Congress. He was pounded by the deep state puppets that this is wrong. Well, now that the FISA warrant has come out, even with its redactions,
one lie after another.
It is evident. It is evident that Devin Nunes was correct.
And this doesn't just involve Democrats. This involves Republicans.
But let's name a name. John McCain.
Yeah.
He sent, who's his chief of staff's name? Kramer?
Yeah.
He sent his chief of staff, Kramer, over to London to deliver that dossier. In fact, when that toad, Strzok, was testifying, he testified. I believe Meadows was asking him these questions, and he said, or maybe it was Jeffers was asking him this question. Jeffers was asking him the questions. He said, well, you had 3 fake dossiers. You had the McCain one, and you had the one that came through Fusion GPS, and you had a different one. But they labeled one of the dossiers the McCain one.
Oh, gosh.
Right? So this was and this is what I've always said, Greg, the right, left, and you mentioned me going to D.C. starting back in '88 with Reagan. The first thing Ronald Reagan taught me was the right, and at the time I thought, oh, this is kind of odd, but the right-left axis is, the word was used, theater. It is meant to divide and conquer the public and to keep them distracted from what's really going on. And what's
Reagan
really
said
going
this.
on. This was Reagan would give this presentation to his advisors, who would then present it to us.
Wow.
And what we were told was the real axis to work on was upping freedom, because what's now called the deep state worked the up-down axis, up being freedom, down being oppression, trying to strip as much freedom and liberty from people in our country and around the world and oppress as many people as possible. And that the right-left axis was theater. That was the first lesson that Reagan wanted the people around him cognizant about.
And I wonder why they got Hinckley to shoot him.
Well, right. So 2 months after Reagan gets into office, what happens?
Hinckley?
Right, he gets shot. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that just wasn't, it's
Trump,
not like I think it was a random event. It wasn't.
Let's fast forward to today. Trump, you've said this off camera. I don't know if you can say it on camera. Can you tell us how well Trump is protected? I mean, everybody thinks, he's going to end up like JFK. I don't think so.
A couple things. I believe there have been a number of assassination attempts on his life since
the press has not reported, or they have not said, or whatever.
And let's add that to the list that we spoke about earlier. I've been told that there have been close to a dozen attempts on his life, and obviously he has survived those. I believe the difference between JFK and Donald Trump is the following. Donald Trump has the support of the military. Donald Trump, I believe, has not only the Secret Service protecting him, but I believe he also has another layer of protection that he has arranged for, that he's paid for himself, for him and his family. And I'll tell you something, you can love him or you can hate him, but I don't know how the man functions day to day with the threats on him.
On $1 a year salary.
Even if he was making $1 billion.
No, but he's making $1 a year.
I know, but even if he was making $1 billion, that's why he is beyond under the microscope. He's under the microscope, but he's also under not just a gun, he's under a howitzer every day. And it's amazing, he'll do a big rally, in Pennsylvania, he'll do a big rally in Florida, he'll do a big, he's on the go all the time. And the fact that he has so many deep state players that want him out of the picture, and the fact that he is willing to put his life on the line every minute of every day, to me is incredible. And I don't know how a guy 72 years of age, let alone a guy 32 years of age, has the energy this guy does and has the drive this guy does. And it's remarkable, because I can tell you the deep state players of the Rothschild Rockefeller axis never anticipated the turn of events that occurred in November 2016. And I think every day that goes by overwhelms the Rothschild Rockefeller axis of the deep state and has put them in a position where they are desperate and hysterical. And that's why you see their puppets acting up, such as the Brennans, the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bushes, the Romneys, the McConnells, the Ryans, just to name a couple. They're desperate. They're hysterical. They've always played great offense for decades because they've been able to, because they ran the whole system, and they don't know how to play defense. And now they're in huge trouble.
And I wanted to bring this out because you say that people like Brennan and Obama and Bush 41 and Bush 43 and Clinton, these are all mid-level managers. You're saying that it is Trump's intention.
Soros in there too.
Oh, Soros. Okay, you're saying it's Trump's intention to go after the very top. The as the one banker, the Luciferians at the very top. Part of the 8,000 people that worship Lucifer, according to one banker I brought up a week ago. He was on a very long interview. It's a Dutch banker that said, I can't remember what his last name is, but he said there's about 8,500 people, are into Lucifer and devil worship and child sacrifice and basically using people for what they want to use them for sex or whatever they want to use them for. You're saying that they're going to go all the way to the top. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are going down. I mean, that's still the stated goal.
Yes, and here's why. And you and I have talked about this, Greg, in private. If that doesn't happen, then nothing will have changed. If they don't cut the head of the snake off of the deep state, nothing will have changed. And Trump, I believe, is aware of that. And he realizes what his mission is and how it has to happen.
And just for people who want to know about Hillary, who's also in that mid-level manager range, Jeff Sessions says, I don't think that we should reopen the case. That's just a smokescreen, right? He's not serious, right?
I believe that, and many people will disagree on my assessment of Sessions, but I believe that there is a very large war going on, and behind the curtain, a little bit in front of the curtain, and there's a tremendous amount of theater going on. And I believe when Jeff Sessions makes a statement like that, it's meant as a diversionary tactic. And I believe that Hillary the evidence will be presented, and she will be facing a legitimate rule of law and court proceedings. Yes, I believe that.
Whew, what an interview. I hope I asked all the right questions. Is there anything you wanted to get in that I didn't ask you about? I mean, I know this is, as my interviews goes, usually I can go 30 minutes. This was like 65 minutes or something. It's over an hour. And but I loved it. I mean, I loved it. So
Greg, I hope, I think if it's possible, provide that link.
The movie, I'll do that. Okay. That'll be after the interview
section.
Yeah,
and that doesn't mean that the Magnitsky Act link will be up very long because the deep state keeps taking it down when it gets posted.
Well, let's test it.
Yeah, let's test it. Let's see how long it lasts.
Okay. And anything people need to do, anything people, could things be destabilized when all these you said they're not going to roll out 1,000 at a pop. They got 40,000, and someone's going to be using leverage. When they start rolling out things with John Brennan, I'm sure that won't be the only indictment. Do you think that things could get destabilized in the financial community?
I think things could become destabilized in the financial community. I do believe, and you and I have discussed this before, I do believe there is an economic reset that's going to occur. I do believe that Trump, with the assistance of the military, will have assets pre-positioned around the country to ensure peace for the time this transition takes place to existent rule of law and a better financial system that ultimately is fair and, if at a minimum, more fair and more honest than it currently is. I do believe that and I know it sounds bunker mentality like, but I don't think you need to have a year's supply of food around. But I think that it's a good idea. You have insurance on your house, you have insurance in your car, you hopefully have insurance in your health. I think you should have insurance on your food and water supply. I think you should have the necessities. And I also think you should have a means of helping your financial well-being. I think that, if you look over the 5,000 years on Earth, the two of the entities that hold and maintain value in times of distress, just look right now in Venezuela, are gold and silver. If you have a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, have some food, have some water, have a means of defending your family, your property, yourself. And I think that's important as well.
Do you think this is a before or after midterm?
I think that the indictments drop before midterms. I do believe it's a process, that it's a re-education process of what's really been going on behind the scenes for many decades. I think it's a process that starts before the midterms. I think it's a process that continues well past the midterms. But here, the good news, Greg, the good news is I truly believe our country will be far better off, freedoms and liberties restored, and a way of life restored that is not a two-tiered system of one set of rules for the players in the deep state and one set of rules for the rest of the 99.9% of us. I believe when it's all said and done, the country will be far better off, every American will be far better off, and the world will be far better off when the deep state is finally held accountable and the highest echelon of the deep state, through the middle level, through the lower level of the deep state, is essentially neutered and thrown on the ash heap of history.
Dave Janda, the radio show is Operation Freedom. The website is davejanda.com. I will provide the link. I guess you're putting the link on your site as well. I'll put it up for the interview. Thank you, Dave Janda, for coming on for a very extensive, long interview. I hope it wasn't too long for people. I loved it. I mean, I let it run as long as after this, so an hour and 10, 15 minutes. But anyway, I loved it, and I didn't find it boring at all. I mean, I was riveting, actually, frankly. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Hope you come back.
Well, I surely hope so, and I thank you, Greg, and very sincerely, I thank you for everything that you do with USA Watchdog. You do a tremendous service to the public. You provide information that the bought-off, lamestream, fake media will never provide. And most of all, Greg, I thank you for being my friend. You're an incredible human being, and I'm very sincere when I say that.
Thank you, Dr. Dave. You're very kind. And thanks again for being on. Dr. Dave Janda, Operation Freedom, the radio show, which is on Sunday in the Eastern Time Zone. Tell us about your Operation Freedom radio show.
Operation Freedom's on from 2 to 5 every Sunday. It's a live show. Folks can stream it live off my website, davejanda.com. We put a tremendous amount of free content on davejanda.com. We also have a subscription side to davejanda.com. It works out to about 30 cents a day, where we upload extra shows, extra content, extra information, extra interviews. And again, we have a tremendous amount of public's information there, so folks don't have to subscribe. But we do go deep dive on issues, bring other guests in, bring other information in that we can't do on the radio, or that we can't do on the radio is probably the best way to put it. And then we also have a YouTube channel, Operation Freedom, if folks are interested. It's not as prolific as yours is, but I put out about one YouTube a week, short video of issues as it relates to what's happening around the world.
Thank you very much. That's very good. Again, Operation Freedom, the radio show, 2 to 5 Eastern Time, live streamed on davejanda.com. Dave Janda, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Greg.